Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Undercolor of Law take on the fascinating mistake that the Trump administration's top national defense people made when they, as the headline says, accidentally texted a journalist their war plans. When I first saw this headline, I thought it was a joke headline. It's just really ridiculously unbelievable. But in a nutshell, let's break it down. So the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic writes in his article, "I knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons, packages, targets, and timing." Now, the airstrikes that they are talking about happened about a week ago. Put up that headline for you there. And to his credit, the journalist did not publish the details of that war plan, because even now, after the fact, they could compromise actual people who are intelligence sources and could compromise national security. Obviously, the biggest compromise for national security here is that they accidentally included him in a Signal chat. Signal, which we'll talk about, is not a government secure method of communication. But let's go through this a little bit systematically. As most of you probably already know, who are the Houthis? As summarized by a good article by AP News, the Houthis now form the strongest group within Iran's self-described axis of resistance. The others, like Lebanon's Hezbollah and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, they've really been decimated since the October 7th attack upon Israel, the terrorist attack. There has been this war of attrition in Gaza, and it's really degraded those two groups' military capabilities. Now, in the past, the Houthi rebels have attacked probably about 100 merchant vessels with missiles and drones. They've sank 2 vessels. They've killed 4 sailors. This has been going on for a few years. And the reason that the Trump administration did this attack, they were not the first people to do this attack. I mean, you will certainly hear the White House spokesperson always saying, oh, Biden folks, Obama folks did nothing about this. That's really untrue. They all launched attacks against them. But why now that Trump did this particular airstrike campaign is it's, of course, trying to look tough, but they're also trying to force Tehran, which is really behind a lot of the arming of the Houthis, to come to the table to talk about the nuclear disarmament question. Now, was this step up a good thing strategically? That's very much open to debate, because it's probably going to result in more retaliation by the Houthis, which may really hurt the sea traffic in that area as these sorts of attacks increase. You'll actually, if you take a look at the Atlantic article and the other reporting about this leaked chat, it's not really a leaked chat, they deliberately shared it, you'll see there's some debate on that point. J.D. Vance, the vice president, who's also in that chat, has some concerns about whether this is a good move or not a good move. So that's the sort of factual background on the strike, why there was a strike, remind us who the Houthis are. Let's talk about Signal for a second. So Signal, some of you may use it, I use it too, lots of people, journalists use it, business people use it. It's an encrypted app like WhatsApp. It gives you end-to-end encryption. And as summarized here in this CNET.com article, it was released about a decade ago, 2014. It has something like 40 million people use it for the encrypted security aspect of it. And so the idea is that it's harder to hack because it's encrypted, and that way a third party or government entity, kind of ironic here, can't intercept your message very easily. But nothing, of course, in this day and age, or in any day and age, is completely secure. In fact, in 2023, a group of researchers found that they could figure out a Signal user's location by measuring the time between sending the message, receiving notification that the message was delivered. That had an accuracy rate of about 82%. So you could use it to spy on someone's location if you had that technology. In addition to that, which obviously carries some repercussions if you have the Secretary of State's location being tracked by his Signal use, for example, There's also the dangers that ComputerWeekly.com warned of, which is that the Google Threat Intelligence Group disclosed that Russian-backed hackers had specifically stepped up their attacks on Signal because they were trying to get at the way it was being used in the Ukraine. And they're saying it's only a matter of time before Russia starts trying to deploy these hacking techniques against non-military Signal users, such as people in the U.S., in the corporate world, etc. And, of course, now, since it appears that U.S. officials in national security, national defense are using it, that makes them a very juicy target. The warning there is that the Russian hacker attempts are trying to get at linked devices, because if you can manage to get into one device, you can get into other devices. There are multiple accounts. Again, very obvious security concern here when you've got like the National Security Advisor, the Vice President of the United States. They're using Signal, and if that's a way to get into and compromise their personal cell phones, get a lot of damaging information. You get a lot more damaging information if they're using their personal cell phones to actually do national security planning on it, right? So these are some of the obvious problems. So turning to how this happened, according to the Atlantic editor-in-chief Goldberg, he received a request to connect on Signal from a user named Mike Waltz, that's the National Security Advisor. He was sort of skeptical that this was a real invitation to join, because the group chat was called the Houthi PC Small Group, with other members who appeared to be top administration officials, including Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, Vice President J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Radcliffe. He was actually suspicious that this might be either sort of like a joke, or that was some deliberate attempt to entrap a journalist into doing something illegal. He accepted it, thinking maybe this really is the National Security Advisor who wants to maybe talk about, some press type things. And then he sort of sat back and watched what happened as they began to have this chat only a short time before the actual attacks. And he realized, wow, if the attacks actually go off as they're saying, I'll know this is a legit thing. The attacks went off. He was sitting in a parking lot when he heard the press reports of the strikes. So that's the background for this. The National Security Council has not really responded to a request for comment, but the administration has been making some comments. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, predictably wants to sort of like bury the thing and saying, well, I'm sure this won't happen again. So a couple of takeaways here. While Signal does offer a degree of security for most of us that our typical phone text doesn't, it's obviously not a government secured way of communicating. Keep in mind that usually for extremely sensitive discussions, you would be inside the SCIF type environment, which is a secured compartmental information facility. You can't have cell phones in there. So the whole point here is to avoid a way that people could hack into and overhear what it is that's being discussed for these very sensitive issues. The other thing that's important to know is that this is probably a violation of the Federal Records Act, and maybe it's deliberate. I mean, by doing this on Signal, there's no record, right? You can't FOIA Signal, Freedom of Information Act request. So either intended or not intended, it defeats transparency, and it does more than erase or cover up government records. It makes sure they were never created to begin with. So there would be no transparency, no way to look at any accountability. If all these communications are done via something like Signal, there's no preservation for it. It's also a potential crime, as you'll be hearing, because it's a potential violation of the Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act, as you'll also hear, it isn't just when there are spies running around doing espionage, it's also mishandling of information. You may recall that there's a lot of talk about that when Trump had all the classified documents sitting around, out in Mar-a-Lago with no particular secure system for them. And the definition that we'll put up here is as follows. It's whoever being entrusted with or having lawful possession or control of any document relating to national defense through gross negligence permits the same to be removed from its proper place, lost, stolen, that sort of thing. And that is punishable by imprisonment up to 10 years. Similarly, if two or more persons, I like this part, conspire to violate any of these provisions, they are also going to be in violation of it. And here, of course, you've got a conspiracy to violate it of all these top officials, including the Secretary of State, Vice President. It's not that they're trying to take the information and give it to enemies of the United States, but they're mishandling it. It's a conspiracy to mishandle it, because in all that talk on the Signal channel, none of them says, hey, why are we using Signal to discuss this? So they're all agreeing to use the Signal, and that's a problem. Then there's the matter of the hypocrisy, right? I mean, nearly all these folks have vehemently criticized the while back issue of Hillary Clinton's use of a private server. Remember Trump's famous cry of lock her up, right? But of course here, you're not going to see any chance of locking them up. The chances, you're going to hear discussion about this in mainstream media, right? Will DOJ do anything? Most people say kind of unlikely. It's not unlikely, it's impossible. Nothing is going to happen. DOJ is not going to open up any investigation. The FBI is not going to do anything about this. Unlike the Clinton scenario, where obviously they did do an investigation, the FBI did open up an investigation, ultimately found, there's no reason to open up a bring criminal charges. DOJ didn't. But they looked at it. That's not going to happen here. If it does, great, but it's not going to happen. So the government has classified communication systems, obviously, where they can discuss sensitive information. And the real question is, why would these government officials want to do this? So as I pointed out before, maybe they want to do it because they want to avoid the transparency. They don't want there to be records on it. But the other possibility is they're just incredibly careless and incompetent. And watch for the blame shifting that's going to go on here. What did President Trump say about it? He said, quote, I don't know anything about it. Standard Trump response. And then, I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic, the publication. There will be an inevitable turning the blame onto the journalist. Watch for them perhaps begin to say that the journalist who was part of this should be prosecuted or investigated. Also, watch for the end justifies the means, which is kind of what Mike Johnson's already getting at, which is, hey, the strikes went off just fine, so we did nothing wrong. If you really draw back to a 50,000-foot level at this, it also shows the lag time in society of how we respond to changes in technological innovations and communications. It's easy enough to go into a skiff to talk. That's simple competence. If Hegseth, Rubio, if these people were acting in a non-negligent, competent way, you go into the skiff to talk, or you use government secure channels of communication, which maybe they're not 100% secure, but obviously they're more secure than a private sector means of communication, and there's a record. So they could have done that. But it's much harder to turn off those cell phones when you're outside of the skiff, when you're not in the government channels. That's a bigger problem. And it's a challenge for leaders like a defense secretary, like a secretary of state, to figure out, how do we keep up with these sorts of innovations? Our own personal habits, how do we make sure that these kinds of habits don't result in security breaches? But I don't think you're going to see that kind of leadership or thinking from the Trump administration. Now, maybe there will be a congressional inquiry. Absolutely should be. The Democrats should really push on that point for a congressional inquiry to do an investigation. And if someone's going to go on the chopping block, Defense Secretary Hegseth, good candidate for it. Maybe the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz might be put on the chopping block if Trump decides, oh, I want somebody to pay for this mistake. But the most important thing isn't which one of them, if any of them, has to pay for the mistake by resigning. The most important thing is for the Democrats to have hearings and shine sunlight on this and make sure everybody knows what a horrible mistake this was and how they don't really care that they made the mistake. In the meantime, leave you with this little image for those of us who were Sex and the City fans. And that's it for now. We'll keep an eye on this story because there'll be more to it. Look forward to hearing your replies and responses as always, and thanks for watching.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.